Hey friends, and welcome back to the podcast. So as some of you know, I've been doing this storytelling and identities exercise, interviewing my television and screenwriter friends. And as I got to the end of the previous episode that was just on the podcast with my best friend Ryan, I was like, I kind of love this work. And I thought it might be cool to maybe do it myself. So this is kind of a bonus episode in the series. And I thought it might even be more interesting if I had one of my essay coaches interview me and do some of this identities work. So what you'll hear on this episode is a sort of unique situation, at least for this podcast interviewer, where I'm going to be the guest and the interviewer is someone I admire very much named Allie Pineo. Who is Allie? Allie's a writing coach and a college admission essay specialist here at College Essay Guy. She has a BA in English from Stanford University and an MFA from UC Irvine, just like I do. She plays lots of roles here at CEG. She's a workshop facilitator, she's a program advisor, an internal review committee member, an essay specialist, and now a podcast interviewer. She's spent thousands of hours over the past 8 years working with students applying to college, listening for their strengths, and guiding them through the writing process to craft a compelling narrative. And on this episode, basically what she does is helps me brainstorm my own personal statement if I were writing it today. Hope you enjoy.
Hi, Ethan. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Before we begin, I'd love to do a check-in. How are you doing today?
Oh, thanks for asking. I feel a little bit caffeinated, but I think the right amount of caffeinated. I feel excited to be here with you. I feel a little bit vulnerable because I'm not quite sure where this is going to go, and grateful, just deeply grateful for you, the prep that you've done for this episode, and just being able to share this time with you.
Awesome.
How are you?
Yeah. I am feeling good. It's raining outside, and it's been kind of raining for the past couple of days. So lots of cozy vibes, and it's kind of chilly, which is, I'm on Maui, and so it's usually pretty warm. So I kind of like this new, coolness in the air. I'm nervous. to be chatting with you, but I'm also excited to get to know more about you today.
Awesome.
Yeah. So let's jump right in.
Let's go.
Yeah. When I work with a student, I start by letting them know a couple of things. First is that, I come to our discussion with a bias. That's my confession. I listen for identity because I personally find it, really interesting, putting a name to something that might feel abstract or even transient to some people. It can lead to some really cool insights that we can dig into. So this is perfect for today, since we're covering the roles and identities exercise. And then I also let them know I'm here as a listener, a question asker, and an observer with no judgment. I like to sort of follow them, wherever they want to take the conversation. So I'm really excited, and like I said, a little nervous to walk you through this roles and identities exercise, and I'm eager to learn, as I am with all my students, how you see yourself.
Awesome. I'm ready. I'm game.
Cool. So what is this exercise for those who are listening in? It's a non-exhaustive list of roles and identities that Ethan has gone ahead and filled out ahead of time, bolding the identities that are alive and present for him. Ethan, so I like to, let my students sort of lead us in this exercise. Where do you want to start? Which of these, 9 or 10 identities that you've bolded is sort of really popping out at you this morning?
Cool. I'd love to just read them aloud so that folks know the ones that we're working with, and then let me see where my attention's drawn. So in no particular order, the identities that I picked, the ways that I see myself are as a catalyst, someone who starts things, a connector in lots of different ways, a creator, a culture creator, so slightly different, a teacher. I see myself as an engine, which is the productive person who gets things done, a harmonizer, a listener, a seeker, and a writer. And as I look at these, as I'm sort of puzzling through this, I'm like, gosh, all of these are such a big part of the work that I do. It's hard for me to there are other ways that I identify as a father and a husband and a friend. But a lot of them, I'm just connecting, I think, to like college essay guy stuff, maybe because we're on the podcast. I think the one that like, where there's like some aliveness for me right now is the one that's like the connector. And so this may be like the broadest one, but I see myself as a connector in a few different ways. So one is like, I see myself as a connector. Like when I'm sitting at a movie or reading a book, I can't help but think about who else would love this particular thing. It's like, it happened to me on Tuesday when I was like watching a movie. I was just like, oh my gosh. And I can't help but connect certain works of art, for example, to other people. I'm also a connector in terms of the ways that, like, connecting ideas. So when someone is sharing with me, like, oh, I think about myself as this and this, I can't help but connect the different things. So I was already doing it just now when I was like connecting all the identities. I can't help but do that. I also deeply value connecting with other people. So, this comes from me growing up all over the place, which we might get into later. But it became really important to me. Actually, let me get into it for a second because I think it's an important piece of my history. I moved like 20 times, Allie. Like, my parents were missionaries and I went to 13 different schools. And going to these different schools, I think, was really hard. First of all, there were lots of tears. And I think one of the things I had to get good at was connecting with people quickly, like making friends fast. And I think I got pretty good at that by like going deep, asking deep questions. It's interesting though, the opposite of this is also true because I think I got pretty good at disconnecting and like leaving people behind, saying goodbye. So that's interesting. That's a realization moment. I became a disconnector. And there will be times now I notice that when I'm at a party, I like to sort of drop in with people, but I kind of like to Irish goodbye, kind of like peace out. And part of that is because for example, there was a room full of friends on Sunday at a gathering. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I try to say goodbye to everybody, I'm going to want to connect with them deeply. And it's going to take me like 30 minutes and I need to get home. So I just kind of like said goodbye to the person whose birthday was. And then I like peaced out. But connection, like my connections with my closest friends, my connection with my partner and my wife is so, so, so deeply important to me. And then I would say, as it relates to my work as college essay guy, helping students make connections in their lives with deeper parts of themselves, deeply important to me. And then I would say, like, what's at the heart of this work, besides that, is like creating resources, creating exercises that help students to make connections with their mentor, the person who's helping them through this process. And so, for counselors who are listening, if you've ever had a moment that's like, wow, I really feel like I'm more deeply connect with this student, like that's because it comes from me like having deep connections with students through things like the values exercise or this roles and identities exercise is like, oh my gosh, I want other people to experience this sort of deep connection that can happen when we are in this space with one another of like personal growth and self-discovery, making connections about our own lives. And I think this is something that my therapist said a couple of years ago. He said that he was talking about intimacy, and he said intimacy is when, the way he defined it was really interesting, because he asked me, how do you define intimacy? I was like, I don't know. And he said intimacy to him is having feelings about someone else's feelings about their own life. And I want to say that again, because it took me a couple times hearing it myself to hear it. It's like, it's having feelings about someone else's feelings about their life. And that may not apply across the board in every situation. And it all, by the way, it feels kind of edgy for me to talk about intimacy as we're talking about this mentorship relationship. But if we think about it in the broad sense and go like feeling like connected to or close to someone, I think that that's, for me, one of the best parts of this process and this experience is having moments where someone is making a self-discovery and we get to be there to witness, to hold space, to reflect back. So yeah, that was a lot on Connector.
That was a lot. I feel like that is, in terms of sort of the little that I know about you and the few times we've hung out in person and got to have like some nice conversation, connector definitely feels like something that brings together many of your identities. I love that definition of intimacy, having feelings about someone else's feelings about their own life. It's almost hard for me to like grasp that, conceptualize it. I'm wondering, I want to have some feelings about the feelings that you have about your life. So I'm wondering, and this might be a super broad question, interpret it as you will, but what are the feelings that you have about your life?
Ooh, I love this. Let me share some feelings as it relates to this identity of connection. Like, why is this so important to me? I think if I'm honest, I was lonely growing up, and maybe lonelier than I knew. And what I mean by this is like, I spent a lot of time being the new kid. And there were so many instances when it was like, we have a new student today. And I was that new student, And so I think that I had to adapt and create belonging for myself because of this feeling of like sadness of separation. I remember this moment when I was in fourth grade of like sitting at I wouldn't put this in my college essay because I think it's too early, but I remember this moment of like sitting at the lunch table. I haven't shared this with anybody in a long time. And like looking away from the people that I was sitting at the lunch table with because I was biting into my sandwich and I didn't want anybody to see me crying. And so I just like turned my face away so that they wouldn't see my tears as I was literally crying while eating, which by the way is a really funny, I don't know if it's a subreddit or a website or what, but it's just videos of people crying while eating. And I felt so sad that I couldn't be with my mom and dad. Side note, one of the things that I would look forward to at the end of the day was when I would get home, my dad and I would play board games, which are, if you really knew me, you'd know that I really love, and probably there's something deep there. So some loneliness that I think connection was sort of an antidote to. I think that if I fast forward to like the pandemic, I think some of this loneliness came back, as it did for I think a lot of us. But I think I didn't really know it until looking back, how thirsty I was for connection. And by thirsty, I mean like I think I felt dehydrated from hanging out with people. And it wasn't until like I started hanging out with people again, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so great. And it reminded me of moments when you're dehydrated and you don't realize it, and then you drink water and you're like, wow, this tastes really good, like the best water I've ever had. And that's what hanging out with people again did. So like, yeah, those were some feelings, loneliness and sadness. And then once I had that connection, so like after the pandemic, I started to like, play board games again with my close friends. And I started there's this relational meditation practice that I do called circling, and started getting involved with that and felt a sense of calm, a sense of like feeling, I don't know if this is a feeling, but like feeling seen, feeling heard, and a sense of like, yeah, like it was like, if I think about what the need was, like meeting my need for belonging. But it took like being really active, to like bring those things into my life again. Did you have any feelings?
Yeah, I really, when I hear connector, I think about like, what does the quality that comes before connector, what could that look like to really sort of make that connector identity yours? So for example, like one of your identities is harmonizer, right? So it's like, What type of harmonizer are you? Are you a disruptive harmonizer? So I don't think this is what you are, but I love how you talked about where loneliness, and I feel like I can really tap into that feeling of like feeling lonely, feeling left out, feeling like you want to belong and fit in. So I was like, is he a lonely connector? I don't think that's what it is. But yeah, I can really sort of empathize with that feeling of loneliness, and I love how it sort of blossoms into this beautiful thing where I really do see you as a connector of ideas and people and culture and all of, sort of what College Essay Guy is about, connection. That's like, for me, what I feel like is one of our core values. I don't know if you feel that way.
I mean, I hope so. It seems like, especially because our team is like virtual, 99% of the time, that creating connection is particularly challenging and particularly important. But I want to touch on harmonizer. Maybe we could shift. Could we shift to that for a minute?
Yes. Can I say something?
Please.
Cool. Okay. So, when I think about connector and harmonizer, I feel like on a Venn diagram, there's like a really big overlap, but clearly you picked both of them for a reason. So I'm wondering how you see them as different, or how do you distinguish them?
Yeah. Yeah. I love this question. Okay. So the harmonizer in me, like the way it manifests itself on like a daily basis. So there are a few different ways. One is like, I don't know if it's that I avoid conflict, but I get super anxious when people are in conflict, and I really want people to just get along. And so often, perhaps to my own detriment, I will like speed things along so that we can get back to like the place where it's nice. And there's a shadow to this where it's like sometimes it's hard for me to be with like moments of disharmony or uncertainty or conflict, such that it really takes up a lot of brain space. And where this comes from, I think, like when growing up, I think there was a pretty great deal of harmony in my house, like pretty happy upbringing. It wasn't until, so my parents got divorced when I was like 16, 17, but like we were, to their credit, we were kept from the conflict. Like a lot of this, the disagreements, the arguments, whatever they were, happened behind closed doors. And so I, at least on the surface, and, talk to my therapist, but I think there was a good amount of harmony. And it was sort of like different phases of my life. Like when we were overseas, I remember a pretty happy childhood, but I was the oldest of what would end up being 5 siblings. And it was kind of up to me to be a third parent, as it were. And I think I really embraced that role and worked to sort of like make sure, because we had, my younger siblings especially are like 9, 11, and 13 years younger than me. So we had diapers for like 5 or 6 years. So I was kind of like helping run things and being in charge of, putting them to bed and rocking them to sleep and those kinds of things. So I think in terms of it wasn't like mom and dad are fighting and I need to like harmonize. It was more like, hey, let's just make sure things are running smoothly. And so I think that, and this was like starting at 9, that's when my oldest younger brother, Devin, was born, is like, I was sort of like a caretaker. And I've been thinking about this more lately, where I think that it sort of was like, not like I was born for this, but like I was trained for this. And this will get into another overlap identity of like caretaker, where I was really sort of at starting at 9 years old, put in that role of being, we'll call it like more broadly, older brother, but it was literally older brother. So to answer your question, like how does this overlap with connector?
And it doesn't have to necessarily overlap. Maybe you really don't see them as overlapping. That's fine too.
Yeah, I think there are some implied overlaps where it's like, helping people connect helps them to harmonize. That might be a little bit more superficial. I think maybe I'll talk about how I think this is different. I think that this is like, I think the connector is oftentimes for me more inwardly focused, like connecting with myself, making connections, whereas harmonizer is oftentimes more outwardly focused, where I'm trying to create harmony in my external world. And then that is hopefully having the byproduct of creating a harmony inwardly. So it's like almost like connector is something that starts inward, like with a connection that I make in my brain. And then I, create something or externalize it. Whereas the harmonizer, actually, now that I think about it, the desire to harmonize probably starts with something that's happening in my nervous system where I'm like, we need to create harmony. So maybe that kind of falls apart. But I think that for harmonizer, I think that it's the good side of this. I'll just say this. I think the good side of it is like, people rarely get in fights with me. Like I rarely have disagreements. And I think people like that. The downside of that is like, we rarely have disagreements. And so all the sort of like, the juicy stuff that can come on the other side after the repair has happened, I think if I'm really honest, I think I miss out on sometimes because I'm sort of averse to getting into some of the ooey gooey stickiness of like the conflict. And I'm sort of like, avoiding that in explicit and implicit ways. So yeah, harmonizing. I'd say it's important with our team, like with College Essay Guys, like I really want folks to get along and I want things to go well. And that sort of overlapped with the culture creator. Like I want to create a culture, not where we're not talking about things, but where we find good and productive ways to disagree. And folks are able to like communicate clearly when things come up. So yeah.
Cool. So, you've sort of brought up the word caretaker multiple times. And I'm wondering if, with connector and harmonizer, there's sort of this like peace, sort of like this avoidance of conflict. I'm wondering within this role, if you ever sort of have conflicts with other identities of yours, maybe like as a family man, as a father, as a husband, or if with any of these others, catalyst and engine, which sort of has this like very forward moving motion to them, wondering if there's any sort of conflict between identities.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Yeah. I feel kind of seen by your question. And so I've been through phases. I was sort of like, I would say that before my wife and I met, like when I was in my, early 20s, I was more of a creative, wanted to be a writer, maybe a screenwriter. And my wife jokes that she was like, she was dated an artist and then married an entrepreneur. Because as soon as like, well, not as soon as, but like as soon as we knew we were going to have a baby, that's when I started to think about, okay, I need to like create some stability. And that's when like I really started to learn how to be productive, because I was a huge procrastinator, like never getting things done. A true quote unquote artist in the cliche sense of like, kind of messy and kind of like, would start things but not finish. I guess this is like sort of the visionary archetype as well. And it wasn't until I was like, okay, I need to actually like, I don't know, adult or something if we're going to buy some diapers, that I shifted into this new role of like, I don't know, it had a few different components to it, but like the engine, the entrepreneur, the one who gets things done, because I was just needing to create stability and certainty. And so for like, I would say for like 7 years, I like intensely trained while building College Essay Guy to be like, I don't even think entrepreneur is it, to be like an engine, someone who could really get things done and create and be productive at a really high level. And I became, in my wife's words, and this is like for better and for worse, the most productive person that she knows. But there was a cost to that. So like in becoming so productive, a daily cost was like, I would come in from like working. And so oftentimes we had a small house. So I was like working in the living room, and I would like take my productive energy and like just shift it onto Veronica. And I'd be like, okay, let's do this, and I'm still guilty of this sometimes. And I was like, I needed to learn how to be in two different modes. Like fast mode, get stuff done, make the most use of the hours in a day, and then shift into like slow mode. And one of the things I started to do was like when I would walk in the door or when I would switch rooms and go into the living room or go into like the communal space or the bedroom, I would like tell myself, okay, I'm shifting into a different mode. And so that helped me a little bit to like shift from, let's call it like engine/productivity mode into like husband/partner mode. And sometimes that took like some winding down, and it would sometimes just take like an hour or more for me to just like to come in off the moving walkway, to use a metaphor. And so I think that, and I don't think I'm like, I think what helped is finally also creating boundaries around, because I would work at night, I would work early in the morning, I'd get up at 5:30 to like work on a book. And then I finally shifted so that I had some like 9 to 5 work boundaries. What I'd say, Ali, has really come online for me over the last year and a half or 2 years is like, now that College Essay Guy is like running pretty well, we've got an amazing team, et cetera, I've been able to like tap back into some of these old, what I would call like these dormant roles or identities. So like, I've been able to like spend a little more time writing again. So the creator side of me. I've been able to like step into like I don't know what the game part of me is, but like whatever that identity is, the one who just loves to play. The seeker identity, I've been going to more like retreats and workshops over the last year and a half. Stuff that I think I wouldn't have made time for like 5 years ago, because I'm like, well, we gotta keep the lights on here. That I'm like, okay, I'm able to like actually make more time for myself. So I think, again, there was a shift from being outwardly focused, highly focused on values of like certainty and stability. And now there's like more ease, more balance that's come into my life. And I've been able to focus more inwardly on like things like personal growth and fun and joy. And yeah, like slowness. That's been a big theme for me over the last, like, especially the last 6 months, is like slowness.
So I'm hearing a lot of these, when I ask this question about how do your roles conflict, I feel like you sort of shy away from being like, yes, like being the engine conflicts with these things. Again, I see you being a connector, connecting, being an engine to, being able to connect and shift into different modes and dormant roles and identities and values for joy and slowness.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about sort of, the NACAC presentation that you gave on putting on your own mask first. I'm wondering, I hear when I hear you talk, I'm hearing a lot of like balance that's happening between these different roles. And I was sort of wondering, where are you at in terms of balancing all of these different roles?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like feeling called in to like really look at more like where the conflicts happen. So, and then I want to answer the second part, which is like, where am I in terms of balance? I think a specific way that it conflicted is like, I think I wanted to be like the best husband and partner and the best father and the best college essay guy. And, and I just feel like in order to do all of the things at a really high level, it required some trade-offs. And one of the trade-offs, like if you would have asked me 5 years ago, like, what do you do for yourself? I would have been like, what do you mean?
Yeah. What do you do for yourself?
Well, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have been like, not much. Like in fact, I do this pie chart exercise where it's like, how do you spend your time and what are you focused on? And the self percentage was like 2% or 0%. So fast forward to now, some things that I do for myself are pickleball. I play lots of pickleball. I also have been really focused on my health lately and, have a naturopath and have, some different supplements that I'm taking. There's like sort of specific things I do. Like I really, and I don't do this as often as I would like, but I love massage. My love language is touch. So like I will get a massage from time to time. I also have, nobody like knows this about me, but I have a best friend named Greg, one of my best friends. And we get together semi-regularly and we'll just like talk about a poem. So we both subscribe to like the Writer's Almanac, like there's like a poem a day. And we will just get in and we'll just like love a poem. One of the poems, in fact, that we're going to do next is the one that I sent you recently about irony. And we record them because we don't know if we're maybe going to release them one day, but it's really just for us right now. We might end up, it's kind of messy. It's like a combination of like us connecting about our relationship. And this was a friend who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer last year. And right around the same time, we were like, oh my gosh, how much time do we have left? And how do we really want to spend this time? And it really shook me up and had me thinking about what's important. And I think it's been responsible for some of these changes. So those are some things. I'm also noticing that I'm like pausing, slowing down. I mentioned games. I play board games sometimes once a week, sometimes like 4 times a week.
I have a question. So I love, that you're talking about what you do for yourself, because I truly feel like, the cliche of like, you can't pour from an empty cup. And so like filling your cup is incredibly important because then you're able to give more generously to those around you. And so I heard you mention, I want to be the best husband and the best father, the best, college essay guy. I'm wondering how you define that. Like, what does that look like to you?
Ooh, that's a really good one. Okay. I can feel into how I know that I'm being the best father. So at the time of this recording, my daughter's 9 now. I read this parenting book when she was like 2, and it's called Listen. It's amazing. We'll link to it in the show notes. But one of the things that it talks about is just something called special time. And what it is you set a timer for 10 or 15 minutes and you just let the kid lead. And I started to do this with Zola, where I would just let her do whatever she wanted to do, whether it was playing with dolls or puppets or Lego, and just let her do the thing and follow her lead. And the way that she responded to me was like with such presence and joy and like just love. And I could feel when she felt connected to me. And, if I would ask her to like do something like, hey, it's time to go to bed, she'd be like, okay, because she felt connected to me. And I noticed that sometimes if I were to say like, hey, it's time to eat or it's time to go to bed, and she was like responded in a, rough way or like resistant, it was when she didn't feel connected to me. So I know this is a weird heuristic, but like I know if Zola is connected to me just by, there are two things. One is like, if things need to get done, how is she responding to me in terms of like my directives? But also there's something that she does, it's called the Zola lean, where she'll just like, she's sitting next to me. First of all, her like wanting to sit next to me, but she'll just like lean into me as, just like literally lean her body. And sometimes I'll be like a little bit annoyed by it initially because I'll forget that she's doing it. And I'll be like, hey, I'm trying to whatever, eat or type or, read to you or something. And then I'm like, oh, wait. And I'll ask her, are you doing the Zola lean right now? And she's like, yeah. So that's how I know that I'm like doing okay on like a day-to-day or weekly basis. With my partner, with my wife, if I notice that Veronica is in her playful zone, where she's like free to like be silly and jokey, that's usually a pretty good sign that we're connected, that she's feeling spacious. And that's what I look for, is like, she's feeling playful, unburdened in a way by the cares of this world. When it comes to being like a good college essay guy right now, or the best college essay guy, it used to be, I don't know what it used to be. What it is right now is like, do people feel, meaning like our team, do we feel connected to the mission, like the thing that we're doing in the world? Are we working the right amount? In other words, do people feel like they're not burnt out? That's a double negative, but whatever the opposite of being burnt out is, do people feel like they're working the right amount, doing work that they and we all care about, and with a clear sense of like what's expected of us? Because I think that that's a big contributor of how I think when the feedback that I'm getting and the stuff that I've read is like, do people know what's expected of them? But I think there's something that I sort of intuitively track for, is like when we're on our team meetings or in one-on-one conversations, is there joy? Like, do we feel like, glad to be here? And it's sometimes not easy to track online. Sometimes it's easier to track when we have our retreats or like our in-person things, where I do sense, but I'm biased because I'm like the one who's like partly in charge of doing this. But like, are we having a good time together? Are we enjoying spending time together? And I think my role has shifted over the years, where now it's a little bit more about like sort of, creating some of those experiences, but also like writing. Like, am I making time for writing and creating? Because I think that that's where I find my happy place. And I think that's kind of, where college essay guy started. And I think how I can have the biggest impact is through like writing and teaching, like teaching the online pieces. And then sometimes, working one-on-one with students.
I'd love to talk about writing and teaching since you brought it up. On your 21 details exercise that you have on the College Essay Guy blog, you talked about how you wanted to be a screenwriter. And so I'm wondering how, where are you at in terms of, that aspiration that you had and how that has evolved into being a teacher or a writer?
I'm so glad that I'm not a screenwriter now. And this is coming off of like podcasts with 3 screenwriter friends. This is funny that it's the 4th episode. And just listening to them, even though I love all of them, I'm just like, I like my life. I like the path I chose so much more because I feel that in their lives, they're like creatively, they're doing some cool things, but like connectively, relationally, I don't know. I'm not going to say like they're not fulfilled, but I just see like, in terms of meeting my needs for like relational connection, it's just so fulfilled by this work. So I had this shift, this moment when I was 23, 24. So like early on, where I realized that I could, the work that I wanted to do, or the creative work, was so much more fulfilling when done with somebody else. And what I mean by this is like, I was sort of studying screenwriting, or really stealing my best friend's USC screenwriting education, and taking those principles and helping students story their lives. That was a big moment for me of like, oh, wow, there's this deep need for me of like, I don't know, meaningful work or contribution to someone else's life that was unlocked. And it felt much more, it just landed for me a lot more and meant a lot more to me than just sort of like applying it to like, a crappy screenplay that would never see the light of day. And then I think that also when I saw how students, telling their own stories could be therapeutic. And, to use narrative therapy a little bit, when I studied narrative therapy, like seeing how students telling their stories of their lives could be life-changing, I think, or at least like destiny bending for certain students, both in terms of the outcome of like where they got in, but even more sort of like on this more, I want to say like cellular level. Like there's this note that came through in Slack, I think you saw this earlier today, where a student just got accepted into their, early decision school. But the thing they said was, I feel more myself after writing those essays than I did before. And our head of coaches, Calvin, commented, that's the best thing to hear, acceptance and acceptance. And so like that to me of like that deeper possibility of students feeling more acceptance for themselves and like feels to me like at the heart of this work. And that's when I went, oh, that's getting to that place is such a creative endeavor. And all of my creative, desires to sort of that manifested themselves through screenplays was like, oh, I can get that need, that desire for being creative met in this other way. And once I made that decision, I was like, I don't need to be a screenwriter. I don't want to be an actor necessarily. And I've honestly had no desire to go back because I feel, creatively fulfilled, as it were, through this work. But also, hey, I get to like still be an actor by doing, YouTube videos and podcasts and stuff.
I love that. Something just like a theme that I'm seeing emerge right now, or sort of like an all-encompassing identity is like your culture creator, which, you sort of offered like a little bit more of a nuance. You said, I'm a culture tenderer. In terms of, I was like, what does he mean by like culture tenderer? Why isn't like, don't you create culture? But sort of what I'm seeing from you is that like, you like to sort of perpetuate the things that you hold most dear to you in terms of, feeling more yourself and allowing for other students to feel that way or to have that sort of like sense. But then also when you were talking about, how do you measure what it means to be a good father, husband, CEG, the college essay guy. And, it's like when Zola is connecting with you, right? And that's like one of your main identities. And then, when your partner, your wife is, sort of feeling spacious and unburdened, it made me think of like harmony and peace. Mm-hmm. And then as the college essay guy, you asked a bunch of questions. You didn't sort of like dictate things. It was like very Socratic. And again, that idea of like spaciousness and joy and that the harmonizer in you asking questions, which sort of like made me think a little bit about seeker. When you're asking questions, you're sort of like seeking, knowledge or seeking to understand, wondering, how do you seek? What do you seek?
Oh, okay. There's something that I want to say about culture tender, and then I want to talk about seeker. That's really, I'd love to get into that. So this, just to clarify for folks who are like, what does he mean by culture tender? So I was talking about this with John on my team, and he was like, we were talking about culture creation, and he's like, I think we already have a culture at CEG, at College Essay Guy. I think you're not necessarily creating it. You're like keeping it going. And I was like, yeah, what's the word that means like keeping it going? And I was thinking about like a fire where you're sort of like, when you have to tend the fire, like the fire is already burning. It's really about how do we keep adding kindling and keeping the fire going. So that's kind of how I see my role at College Essay Guy now that the culture is created. It's like, how do I tend that? So it's a weird word, but culture tender is the way I think of that. And the other thing that popped up for me as you were sharing that is there's another identity, because I don't like to see myself as, and I don't think I actually am the one who's like creating the things. I think what I'm doing is I'm synthesizing the things. And I'll give you an example of this. Like a couple years ago, it became evident that the team wanted a 1, 3, 5-year vision. And I was kind of like averse to this because I was like, wait, don't we have a vision? Like, isn't it obvious? Kind of like, and people were like, well, no. And I asked the team on a Zoom call, I was like, who would like us to create a 1, 3, 5-year vision? And like everyone's hand went up. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I went, all right, well, let's talk about it. Like, what do y'all think the vision should be? And, there was some conversation, but it wasn't like, there wasn't a ton of like, we didn't, I thought we were going to be like, get into it and like, everybody's going to share their opinions. And there was some like reticence or something. And so, I did end up soliciting some input on this. And then I kind of went away with John on my team and wrote something up that was like a few pages long. And I felt self-conscious doing it because I was like, I don't want this to be like Moses coming down from the mountaintop with me like being down like, here is our vision. But in some way, because I want to believe that we're a much more flat organization and that we've got so much leadership and different people are bringing in their positions and their, what they care about. So I don't want to be like, here's what I think it is. But there was a way that I was being called to do that. So on a Google Doc that was editable, I proposed to the team. I was like, hey, I think this is what our vision is. What do you think? And I was kind of like shy about it, but I was like, I think that it's this. And then I asked the team, what thoughts? And in the chat or verbally, someone was like, this is the best meeting we've had. Or some other people were like, this is exactly what we wanted. And I was like, but wait, isn't this just like the obvious stuff? Like the stuff that we, and what Stevie said on our team, Stevie goes, Ethan, I feel like what your job is, and one of your jobs at CEG is to be like lead synthesizer. And like you took our thoughts and ideas and you kind of pulled them together and like reflected them back. And I was like, ooh, I can get down with that. Like leading in that way feels like something that I feel uniquely excited about and like called to do. So I think that that's another one that I didn't highlight on the list that I feel excited to do. And it is a way that I lead. And so anyway, and I was also excited about it because as you were sort of synthesizing, as you were like talking about different parts of me, I was kind of like, oh yeah, I got to bring that one in. Okay. Sorry, to get to your question, seeker. How am I seeking these days? I think that if I were to, again, think about my life in sort of like 3 stages, there was like pre-baby and then like the first 7 years of baby and then like the last 2 years. I think that like I was definitely seeking certainty and stability, and that meant being really productive and, like efficiency obsessed in some ways and creating a lot of stuff. People are like, how did you create a blog and all these posts? And first of all, the team creates a bunch of it, but a lot of it was just like, well, I worked a lot of hours. But I would say now the seeker side of me is sort of like discovering what other sides of me have been dormant and were sort of like put on sleep mode, over the last 7 years. And so, what are those different sides of me? That's what I'm looking for. And so I have some sort of early inklings of what these are, ideas about what these sides of me are. And I think part of it is also, well, I'll just give one of them, is like coming back to the creator in me. I have this real desire to like be writing new things. And so I'm seeking opportunities to just like write, create. I mean, it's my happy place if I can spend half the day just like writing stuff. So that kind of connect. Yeah, please.
Yeah. What are you writing these days? Like what topics, ideas, what's inspiring you? And you can even like name other people's writing that's inspiring you to write about X, Y, Z.
So a few different things. One is like, so there's still stuff that's in the realm of like college essay guy land. So I'm like rewriting, we're going to do a revised reprint of College Admission Essentials, where I've been like writing stuff about mental health in the college admission process and disclosures there. And some students asked, after the Supreme Court decision to ban race-conscious admission, should I write about race in my college application? And so I've been writing about, questions to consider. I've also been writing like really niche things like how to weave in extracurriculars to your application. And also about AI. Like this morning I was working on, considerations for students who are thinking about using AI and whether or not to do it. And that's going to be in the book as well. So there's like college essay guy stuff, which still is really fulfilling to me. Separate from that, I've been really interested, Ali, in the notion of enoughness. And by enoughness, this is sort of outside the realm of college essay guy, but it's like, what does it mean to do enough, to be enough? You know, you ask this question of like, what does it mean to like be the best father, to be the best husband, to be the best college essay guy? Well, each of these can kind of be broken down into like an enoughness question. So for example, a question I would ask myself is like, how much money is enough money? How much working out is enough? And these are things that like one can actually go and like mathematically figure out and then develop projects around. So part of what I've been exploring is like, for myself in these different areas of my life, like I want to connect with my friends. How much is enough? Like what are the markers of enoughness for myself? So I've been writing and thinking a lot about that, like journaling about enoughness in lots of different areas of my life. Another thing that's just recently come online is like this poet inside of me that was alive in high school and definitely in college that I kind of like put away. Like I've been sort of like writing really short poems and that's just meant like slowing down and spending time in language and not to like produce something that's going to be like a resource or a book, but just for me, like nobody else sees it. And so that's felt really inwardly, I would say, like productive.
Yeah, and I love how that contrasts sort of like the engine, where it's like you need to like be doing something to produce like an end product. Yeah, so my background is I'm a, former professional ballet dancer. And, I found that once I got a contract in a company, sort of like the creativity of and the reasons why I loved dancing all of a sudden became like commodified and it wasn't for me anymore. So yeah, I think that, in the work that we do as writers, as artists, as thinkers, it's nice to be able to sort of have ownership over a piece that isn't supposed to generate other things for other people. So yeah, I'm really sort of connecting with that.
I want to flip that. I want to double click for just a second and hear what has been your journey in terms of your own creative, foci or, focuses in terms of like, because I sort of like, quote unquote, left it all behind, but I'm curious what either overlaps or what conflicts do you see in your own relationship to your own creative impulse and drive and how it jives with or doesn't jive with the work that we do?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question because I'm sort of at a crossroads right now where, I really sort of was able to have this like hybrid identity as an essay coach, as a writer, as a choreographer, as a professional contemporary dancer. And just due to, life circumstances, how, life evolves with challenges, having a child, I have a 3-year-old. And also this need for stability and certainty, I'm finding that I'm having to shed this layer of being a dancer and a choreographer to make room for, being more of a full-time essay coach with College Essay Guy. But I'm okay with sort of like shedding that layer. One, I always feel like I'm a dancer no matter what. I like to move my body. I feel embodied in everything I do. And number two, it's that what brings me joy about dance is community. It's community and storytelling. And that is what I get to do every day in my work. As an essay coach, I'm connecting with students, helping them to sort of identify their story, helping to amplify what it is that they're wanting to show about themselves. And I find it to be really fulfilling work. So even though I'm not, getting to dance as much in the studio, I still feel like connection and storytelling is central to what brings me joy. So yeah, that has been kind of my trajectory. I feel sad when I've heard you say a couple of times, I've sort of like let go of my like theater and acting identity. I feel like, and I don't know why, I feel a sadness when I hear you say that. Maybe it's because maybe I'm going through a shift and I'm like, no, I'm always going to be that.
Well, I'll say this. I think that I really resonate with this. I'll always be that. Like I think I will always be an actor, but I think about it in like a broader sense of like playing different roles, like all the stuff that we're talking about is like, I still think of, this is going to trip people out, but like, I think of college essay guy as being like a role that I play, one of many. And I shift into, and this is like getting into what I studied in college, which was like performance studies. Like we perform these different things. We perform, gender, we perform, in all sorts of ways. Anyway, my point here is that like each of these is just a different role that we're playing. So I still feel like I'm still getting to do those things. And then side note, like I still do voiceover sometimes on the side. Like I did some commercials for Disney just this week. So I'm still getting to do that when I want to. But it's funny because as you say that sadness, I'm like, oh, I don't feel the sadness. I might have at some point, but I'm like, I don't envy. First of all, there's not a lot of work to be had out there for actors and for writers. LA and Hollywood is really, really shifting. So in terms of that side, but even like, I don't know, it's so funny. I used to be like excited about a rehearsal process and be like 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. That sounds amazing. I can't imagine just giving 20 hours of my week to a play. It just doesn't sound fun like it used to.
Agreed. I'm there too. Yeah. It's sort of this like very intense, immersive thing that can be, hard to find balance. And so I'm also somebody that values balance. And so it's hard to maintain and stay true to my desire for balance, living the artist life.
But the sense of unity and connectedness and community that can be created over a week, let's say, in an intensive creative process, I still get that when I go on like retreats or when I go to particular, 5-day events. So, there are different types of conferences that I'll go to and I'll be like in intense, kind of like, like summer camp or slumber party vibes where it's like you're really in it with people over the course of a few days. So I still get that need met in that particular way for like what you're talking about, community and connection. But I think I was getting a lot of needs met through theater because that would have been such a point of connection for me in high school and college. And then I was like, oh, wait, I can get these needs met elsewhere and feel like actually totally, really fully good with it. That's a lot of adverbs.
Yeah. I'm so happy that you sort of talked about the idea about like performance, because a question that I have is that you have this sort of online persona. You are everywhere online as it pertains to college essays. And so I'm wondering, what parts of your identity do you feel are performed for the outside world, and how do they sort of overlap with your inner world? Like what is truly for you? Or do you sort of perform, are you really authentic in terms of like performing all of who you are?
Yeah. So a couple different thoughts. One is like when I'm recording a YouTube video, there's an extra level of energy that I have to bring to like make the videos pop. And it's sort of turned up and it's a little bit more than what I'm doing right now. So for example, like YouTube energy sounds like this. Hey friends, what's up? College Essay Guy here. Welcome back to the channel. So today we're talking about whatever the thing is. And it's like, you can hear my pitch is up a little bit. There's a little bit more speed and it's also more efficient because you got to keep people's attention. So if I'm thinking about this in terms of values, it's like enthusiasm, it's efficiency, and it's practicality because I really want to be helpful. And so those are all deep and true parts of me and parts that I can tap into. And I kind of like choose those. There's also something like, I don't know if this is a value, but like affability that I'm choosing and a little bit of humor, but like 10% humor. What gets missed on YouTube, Ethan, is the parts of me that love to go slower, that are quiet. There's not a lot of slowness or quiet unless you watch one of the videos. It's like a work-along video where I'm doing exercises and you're doing them too. There's also a part of me that's like, I think what gets missed in those fast videos is like what I would call wisdom. And I think the wisdom that one can tap into if one does go slower and like, something like uncertainty and like that leads to critical thinking and mystery Because there's a lot of, in the YouTube videos, there's a lot of like certainty and just do this, this, and this, and there's step-by-stepness that leaves out some variety. So I feel like, and this happens more like you mentioned teacher, like on the webinars, or in like a course that I teach, there's a little bit more time for slowness and for helping other people tap into their own wisdom and like quiet and sense of, reflective, self. When it comes to like the writerly side of me, there's sort of this, I've sort of oriented a lot of the college essay guy writing to be very like helpful and practical, but not as much, what are the pieces that are left out there? I would say it's very sort of like, it's almost like technical writing in the sense of like, do this and then do this and then do this. And so the other sides of me, like the silly side of me, or the part of me that, like I've always wanted to do a presentation or a webinar on like voice, because voice is like, a big thing in college essays. People talk about it a lot. But I've wanted to do it in terms of like the different voices that I can do, because I can do lots of different accents. And that's like a fun, creative thing that I think would be really fun to do. But I'm like, well, it's not very practical. But yeah, so there's that one. And then there's like, accents. There's like silly accents that I love to do. And I used to do this with my students, where I would do like I would teach critical reading and I would read the passages and do different accents. I'm feeling a bit self-conscious now. Like I'm sort of being asked at the party.
This is fantastic.
To like do the thing. I need something to
I get
read.
it. Yes.
You know what I mean?
It's like when somebody tells me, "Oh, Allie, you're a dancer. Go dance for us." I'm like,
Right. Do some dancing. I feel like if folks want to hear me do voices, they can go to the website and hear those, because there are a bunch of different ones. But I think I feel self-conscious doing more.
Cool. Are you ready to brainstorm a college essay?
Yes, I'm ready. Let's do it. And I'm excited to do this with you.
Okay, cool. One of the reasons why I feel like I connected with you many years ago was because of this identity that you had as like a performer, because I just feel like performers are kindred spirits, and we sort of understand one another on an energetic level. And so I really felt connected. So I'm sort of gonna confess that, a frame that I'm seeing, and you can totally disagree with the frame. And I actually find that to be more interesting when I present a frame to a student and they're like, that makes them think of something else. And then that leads to something even greater. So of course, like my bias is like, when we're talking about performance and performance of gender and the performance of these different roles and our sort of outward persona versus more of our like authentic inner persona, that was making me think about like, what is, maybe a frame could be, what I've left behind and what I, as a performer, I've left behind this identity, and I've sort of like, what am I performing now? And sort of talking about all of these different roles you play. Can I just sort of point out like other things, like other phrases that really stood out to me?
Please.
I love how you framed like enoughness as a landscape, and how that connects to, different measures of, are you doing a good job? Am I good? As a father, as a husband, as the college essay guy. Let's see, I've sort of, I've taken notes. Something that I tend to do with students, I transcribe everything they say. This theme about like being dormant, put on sleep mode, or like being in the shadow. So not being like, outwardly performing, but sort of like more inward. Let's see, what are some of the other things? Yeah, you mentioned dormant a couple of times in terms of like your roles and identities that are dormant or not as like, sort of like readily like out there. I love how you talk about different modes. You have a fast mode and a slow mode. This idea about shifting, right? This like movement, this like feeling of movement with your identities. And then the texture of like the smoothness as a caretaker. Yeah, so those are sort of like the phrasings that came up for me as like things that we could maybe attach to create a frame that holds all of these different identities. But of course, as a performer, I sort of latched onto the performer. So I'm wondering, what is sort of feeling connective for you in terms of all of these different identities?
Yeah, when I hear the performer one, I think about cultural connotations with performing, and sometimes that's seen as like disingenuous or something. And so if I were to write a personal statement coming out of this, like I would want to qualify and clarify what I mean by performer. And so I think that like right now I'm performing the role of interview guest, but also I'm like actually an interview guest, And so it's sort of a tricky sort of heady thing. So there's another part of me that's like reticent to use that because I don't want people to think that I'm quote unquote faking it all the time, because I don't think that's true either. So, but a thing that you said just really landed for me. And it was this notion of like identities I've left behind. And I think that would be, I felt like some energy and like some excitement to like actually go and write that or go make a list of those things. And I was like imagining that I could make a list of identities that I've left behind and say a little bit about each of those. And I'd be curious to hear your reflections on some of the ones that are like, that you heard me mention that were interesting to you in terms of the identities I've left behind. And then I think, again, now I'm kind of you got me in college essay mode, and I'm kind of going, okay, I think there would probably be a pivot into something like identities that I'm calling in, like things that I'm wanting to experience and explore more in my life. And that feels like the emergent part of me. And it feels like if I was issuing a status update, it would be like, okay, this is the edge of my awareness around things that I'm wanting to call in more. And so I don't know, I guess I just love to hear, based on what we've talked about so far, like if we just use those two frames, like what are some identities that you hear that I've left behind? And then what are some identities that you see me calling in? And I don't know, I'd love to hear, if you'll humor me here, like what are some of because I would want to focus on like the gifts of each of these. So not like shaming the parts I've left behind, but be like, in quotes, each one has made me who I am. But it's like some of the positive qualities that you see in either the ones I've left behind or the ones that I'm calling in. If you would be so kind, I would just love to get your thoughts.
Yeah. Okay, so immediately coming to mind for me, things that you've left behind but that have transformed you for the better would be, on your 21 identities, you talk about being a third culture kid, which you really talked about the themes of loneliness. But what came out of that is being a connector. And then, sort of like who you were when you met your wife. You were sort of like more of an artist, a visionary, but how that evolved into you being an engine. Mm-hmm. And then, this desire to be, a screenwriter, and how that has evolved for you. You've left that behind to become a teacher and a writer. So like, yes, writing for the company, but also writing for yourself. And then in terms of a pivot of what you're calling in, I'm trying to think, did we talk about, maybe that's like what you're seeking?
Yeah, that feels true. And you mentioned a couple that I think I'm calling in, like even the writing for myself feels like something that I'm calling in. There are new ways that I'm making connections, I think, that I'm calling in. So some of these identities have, like there's a writerly self that was before, and like the new writerly self looks a different way.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you're also calling in enoughness. And sort of like hugely redefining what self-worth and what is enough, what is good, what is best for you in a way that feels like it's not conflicting and creating tension with your other identities.
Allie, that just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like that feels like the whole deal right there. Like calling in enoughness feels like OMG, like yes. And like defining, yes, that to me, I think that's what I'm seeking too, is like a real, true, defined sense of enoughness.
And maybe part of that is, I love how you talked about, something that you may not be quote unquote performing is mystery, something that's missing. And so how, yes. Enoughness is, gosh, man, enoughness is a mystery, right? And I feel like it's not a landing place. It's more of it's a journey.
Yeah.
So perhaps the mystery of enoughness.
Yeah, this is so good. I can like see a structure now where there's like, who I was, like who I've been, and then who I'm becoming. And so like who I was an artist, was a, I could riff on that. And then who I've been has been like, and then has been like rooted in certain values of like certainty, stability, anyway, like sort of college essay guy, like for the last, for 7 years while I was raising my daughter. And then there's like this new me that's coming forth that's like embodied by the seeker and that's interested in like, yeah, I love this mystery. That feels so true. And how mystery is sort of the, not antidote, but like the pendulum swing. Because I think for like when my daughter was born and we were trying to create stability, I was really focused on certainty and like, let's make sure we pay the bills and, let's be certain. And now I'm a little bit more like, all right, well, adventure, a little mystery. Let me go on some retreats and like find these other sides of myself. So I could see now I'm kind of like, okay, maybe 6-ish paragraphs, a couple paragraphs on like who I was. And then there's like this so like, I'm calling this like the 3 stages of my life. There's like Ethan up until 23. Really, I would say like 33. And then there was like Ethan who was like, building college essay guy from 0 to 7 years. And then like, yeah, like that's sort of like phase 2. And then like for the last couple years, who is Ethan, phase 3? Who am I becoming? Yeah, I'm starting to like see a structure here. That's kind of exciting.
I love it. And I love how the new me, there's hints of or callbacks to the artist, right? Or when I think my own perception of artist and what that word, what that identity embodies, where there's like a little bit more comfortability with like the amorphous and the abstract, and the new me, how it's sort of coming back to like being okay with mystery and defining something that's sort of, in my eyes, undefinable, like enoughness, right? That's also shifting and as transient as identity is. So yeah, beautiful sort of like full circle. Everything sort of calls back and there's connective threads between all three stages of who you are. So do you see this as like a multiple identities essay or as just like a singular identity that you're wanting to riff off of?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I love this question. Okay, so I think I can definitely see this as there are many identities that have made me who I am. And that sounds fun to write. And I feel like I think I would probably start there and I would write this as like, here are different ways that I have like different identities that have like manifested in my life. In terms of, I'm going to look at the list a second. Is there one identity to rule them all? One ring to rule them all? Let's see. So I think that like, let me just see what the candidates would be. So synthesizer. I guess I could see synthesizer. That sounds a little technical because I was synthesizing certain things when I was in my 20s and then synthesizing new things in my 30s and then synthesizing new things in my 40s. I don't know. Seeker, let's see. Different things that I've been seeking. Yeah. Okay. Seeker is a candidate here where I was like seeking, I don't know, creative fulfillment or something in my 20s and then seeking certainty and stability in my 30s. And now I'm seeking like, I don't know, mystery. So I think seeker could do it. That could be cool. I love the mystery thing that you brought up. And I love the idea of seeking mystery. That kind of seems cool and feels like yummy just for where I'm at in life right now. So I hesitate to, so here's why I'm pausing is like, I hesitate to like, I think if I were to come up with an identity now, I would be writing it with sort of like this, I don't know, a too narrow vision of myself. And so what I think I would probably do is just write a first draft that doesn't, impose or bring in a single identity. And then I would like sort of be on the lookout for it and like taking what you've asked me as like a seed planted and then just like write and see what comes of it. Because it could be that as I'm writing this, that the seeker thing just doesn't end up being a common theme or thread much at all. So.
Cool. Yeah, I think seeker is nice. I'm sort of looking at my notes and you had, a lot to say under seeker. And I feel like It might even call forth other identities, right? So even though the essay is primarily about your seeker identity, how like within that, being a seeker, you call forth different roles and identities as, because I feel like we're not always, and I use the word performing, not meaning like, it's inauthentic, but, sort of like how we are living out our internal landscape. And so, calling forth these different roles and identities that are just like more alive in certain moments than in others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because some shift to the foreground and background at different times. And so when I talk about performance, I sort of am thinking about that a little bit more than like acting or being inauthentic. But yeah, I love this seeker identity. I feel like I see that in you.
Yeah.
And I think, mystery is kind of a prevalent theme for the writing process in general. So, as you go off if you were my student and I was sort of sending you off to write this essay, I'd let them know that, being comfortable with mystery in the writing process, meaning, even though we have like a pretty clear way forward and this outline, that there's inevitable mystery in the actual taking of ideas from outline into paragraph form. And so, allow for those ideas to lead and guide you where they will, because oftentimes this is just the beginning of the work. And then the first draft is continuing to be an explorer and a seeker, the things that you didn't even think about when we had initially put together the outline. So yeah, sort of let the mystery bring excitement and new ideas, and feel free to include those. I like to tell students, overwrite, because there's so much more that often comes out when you are taking, these abstract ideas into written form. I want to know, how was this process for you being, the playing the role of the student?
It's funny. I feel, first of all, really seen by you. I appreciated your questions. I appreciated the connections that you made. And I don't think I registered this verbally or even like visually, because we can see each other right now, but like, there were like little moments of insight where you connected two things, like for me, where I was like, oh, right, yes, of course. And I also felt really inspired and energized to like make new connections. So I was like, and I didn't expect to the extent that I would feel like I would have like I wouldn't hold that we would have like a clear outline, but I'm like actually feeling like, oh, I could go write this thing now. So I feel, some energy around that. And I love to do this like, once a year or so. I don't do it every year, but I do like to do this again and again from time to time. How else do I feel? I feel a little like self-conscious, because I think there's something about this. I feel like this is self-indulgent or something, where, I don't know, I feel like I've been doing a lot of the talking, but I'm like the interviewee here, but it's just a little bit uncomfortable or unfamiliar. I guess it's unfamiliar because I'm sort of used to doing the listening on these. So there's some little element of like self-consciousness. But yeah, if I could like shift into like, oh, Ethan, that's the way this was supposed to be, then I'm like, oh yeah, right, that was the way it's supposed to be. And
that's so funny you see it that way, because I actually describe, students like you who are so willing to talk about their life as generosity. So yeah, just like so grateful for the generosity and everything you've shared, letting me step into your world and getting to know you better. Just like, yeah, really, really fun experience. That's
a really useful reframe for me, Allie. Like just on a personal level, like and probably on a professional level too, but like seeing that as generous, like something in me just settles hearing that.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you for letting me into your world today. So grateful to know you.
I'm grateful to know you. Hey friends, thanks for listening again. This is officially the end of the Storytelling and Identities series. I promise for real this time, but you can be sure we'll pick up these themes again very soon. We've got some cool new resources coming out. You can get all of them, get updates and all the things by subscribing to pretty much anything on our website, collegeessayguy.com. And that's it. Be well and stay curious.